If you're looking to get started in content creation, like starting a podcast or a YouTube channel, then you're probably in the market for some type of audio gear. Whether it's a USB microphone or an XLR microphone and an audio interface, it can be hard to tell whether budget-friendly gear is actually worth it. Well, in this video, we're taking a look at a budget-friendly audio interface from Fifine, and we're pairing it with a couple of budget-friendly microphones to see what kind of audio quality we can get for under $100. Before we dive in, I want to mention that Fifine sent me the SC1 audio interface and the microphones that we'll be testing. However, they do not have any input on what I'm saying in this video, and I was not paid to make it. I do have some Amazon affiliate links in the description for you though, just in case you're interested in picking up either the interface or the microphones and you want to support this channel. It's always a roll of the dice when you buy something that seems less expensive than it should be. Is it going to be worth it? Or will I just end up buying something more expensive right away and in the end end up spending more than if I had just gotten the better gear to start with? Well, of course, I can't answer that question for all products, but today we're going to try to answer that question for the Fifine SC1 audio interface. At just $55 and sometimes discounted to less than that, it promises great audio quality at a very attractive price. Right now you're hearing the SC1 interface and the Fifine K669D dynamic microphone, which is another budget-friendly piece of gear that pairs nicely with the SC1. It goes for just $37 and offers a podcasty style sound and a very nice build quality. And as you can hear, even though it's a dynamic microphone, the SC1 is not having any trouble providing enough gain for it. I'm actually recording this audio through the SC1 into my MacBook using Audacity. This is how it sounds. Now, of course, we're going to do some testing and some comparisons with the SC1 and a couple other interfaces, but first, let's just do a rundown of the features and specifications. This voiceover was recorded using the Fifine SC1 interface and the Fifine K669C condenser microphone. Processing has been applied to give you a sense of what type of a result you can get. The SC1 interface features a single XLR combo jack and TRS instrument input on the front. The microphone input offers 50 dB of gain, and the conversion is 16-bit up to 48 kHz with 80 dB of dynamic range. On the front of the unit, you'll find a 48-volt phantom power switch for the XLR input, a button to switch between the microphone and instrument input, a 1/4-inch headphone jack, headphone volume knob, and a direct monitoring button. On the top of the unit, you have your 3 main dials, including the gain level for the microphone and instrument inputs, and the main output. On the back, there is a USB-C output and a pair of 1/4-inch TRS outputs. Okay, now we're back to the SC1 with the K669D and no post-processing. Let's get into some audio samples, and for this, we're going to do some samples side by side with another audio interface that's been a solid option at around the same $50 price point for quite a while, and that is the M-Track Solo from M Audio. This interface also features 16-bit conversion and 1 XLR input and around 50 dB of gain, maybe just a touch more. So this is a direct competitor to the SC1. First up, let's just do a back-to-back comparison of a dynamic and a condenser microphone running through both interfaces. This is an audio sample of the Fifine K669D dynamic microphone running through the SC1 audio interface, recording 16-bit 48 kHz. This is a sample of the M Audio M-Track Solo recording using the Fifine K669D at 16-bit 48 kHz. Now here's a sample of the Fifine K669C, which is a condenser microphone that requires 48 volts of phantom power, which the SC1 is providing. So we're recording 48 kHz 16-bit, and I have the gain turned down to just a little bit more than 50%. So it's just a touch higher than 50%. I'm getting very healthy recording levels from the K669C with this gain setting. And here's a sample of the K669C running through the M-Track Solo. Gain is set to just about exactly 50% on the dial, so it's a little bit of a lower gain setting on the M-Track Solo, and I'm getting similar recording levels. But here's how the K669C sounds running through the M-Track Solo, 16-bit, 48 kHz. So, did you hear a difference between the SC1 and the M-Track Solo? Let me know down in the comments. Next up, let's try out a different dynamic microphone, one that has a much lower sensitivity than the K669D, and we'll see how each interface is able to power it. Now this is a sample of the Electro Voice RE20 running through the Fifine SC1 interface. I have the gain set to about 95%. It is just barely backed off of 100%, and I will have normalized this in post up to the same level as the rest of the video. I'll put on the screen how much gain was needed to get it normalized with the rest of the video. So for this comparison, you're not listening for a volume difference in the amount of gain. What you're listening for is What does the rest of the room sound like? Do you hear more background noise? Do you hear more hiss, like that noise floor between the SC1 and next, the M-Track Solo? And now this is a sample of the M-Audio M-Track Solo with the Electro Voice RE20. The RE20 has a sensitivity of about -57 dBV, so it is pretty quiet, not quite as quiet as the SM7B, but still it requires a fair amount of gain to get a healthy signal. I have the gain on the M-Track Solo also set at about 95%, so I put it at 100% and then backed it off just a tiny little bit. And again, I will put on the screen how much gain was necessary to boost the level to get it normalized up with the rest of the audio in the video. But let me know what you hear. Do you hear more hiss, background noise for the SC1 or the M-Track Solo using a low sensitivity dynamic microphone? All right, so now we're going to do a slightly more technical test. I'm going to connect a 150 ohm resistor to the XLR input on both interfaces, and we're going to record 10 seconds of silence, and I'll show you the amount of noise captured in the recording. The 150 ohm resistor is mimicking the resistance of a dynamic microphone, but without picking up any actual sound from the room, so the only noise we're going to see is noise from the interface. Now, the M-Track Solo states that it has 54 dB of gain, and the SC1 states that it has 50 dB of gain, so I've added 4 dB of gain to the SC1 in post to make it a little bit of a more fair comparison of the noise levels. So the noise levels that I'm seeing are pretty similar here, but the SC1 is just slightly less than the M-Track Solo. If you look at the frequency range of the M-Track Solo, especially when the gain is at 100%, it just seems to have a bit more going on there, and the RMS level is just a little bit higher. So even with a little bit of gain added in post, it seems like the preamps in the SC1 are contributing just a bit less noise. Now, just for reference, here's the noise measurement of the Focusrite Vocaster 1, which is a great interface for podcasting and content creation with a retail price of $99. So it's just about double the cost of these other two interfaces. I just wanted to give you one noise sample here to compare to a slightly higher priced option just for reference. Okay, so now let's talk about some pros and cons of the SC1, and we'll keep the comparison going to its most direct competitor here, the M-Track Solo. First up, the pros. The USB connection for the SC1 is USB-C, and it comes with a nice cable that goes from USB-C to C, but also there's a USB-A adapter on the end of it, so you can use it with any device. The USB connection on the M-Track Solo, on the other hand, is USB-B, which has the benefit of being a little bit more secure, meaning it's harder to accidentally unplug. However, if something goes wrong with this cable that comes with the M-Track Solo, you may not have a USB-B cable just laying around at this point because they're getting less and less common. Another pro is the small form factor. The SC1 is very small and a little bit smaller, takes up just a little bit less space on your desk. You've also got TRS outputs for monitor speakers on the SC1, whereas you've got RCA outputs on the M-Track Solo. And honestly, this is another one of those things that you could go either way. I personally I'd like to have the TRS outputs because RCA is another one of those things that I just don't have other stuff that uses RCA cables anymore. And also it doesn't come with RCA cables, so you do need to buy them. Another pro would be, as we observed, there is slightly lower noise coming from the preamp in the SC1 compared to the M-Track Solo. Now, one thing I'm going to say is kind of neutral is that the headphone output on the SC1 is a little bit noisier than the headphone output on the M-Track Solo. I did have to turn them up about the same level, so it doesn't really seem like one is significantly more powerful than the other. But at the same level, with about the same volume in my ears, the M-Track Solo had less background noise and hiss in the headphone output compared to the SC1. I'm calling that neutral and not a con because, in my opinion, the headphone output that you get in the SC1 is pretty much what I would expect for the price of the SC1. It's not bad, whereas the M-Track Solo is better than I expect for the price in terms of that headphone output performance. So I'm not calling it a con for the SC1, only because the M-Track Solo to me is just better than what I would expect, specifically when it comes to that headphone output. All right, so let's talk about a few cons here. So the available gain, as we've said, maxes out at 50 decibels. That is plenty for condenser microphones that use phantom power, and it's also enough for higher sensitivity dynamic mics like the K669D. However, it is not going to be enough gain for dynamic microphones that have a sensitivity that goes around -55 dBV and lower, and there are a lot of dynamic microphones with sensitivity in that lower range, so you're gonna need an inline signal booster like a Fethead or a Cloud Lifter if you plan on using one of those dynamic microphones that needs higher gain. All right, a couple more cons here. It is an all plastic build, which you can't expect super high-end build materials at this price point, but I do, want to be clear, it is an all plastic device. Another con would be there's no monitor mix knob here. There is a button that you press to go between direct monitoring and playback. And the final con is just that 16-bit conversion doesn't allow you for as much headroom when recording as 24-bit does. And that's simply because there's not as much dynamic range with 16-bit depth. Basically, in order to keep your signal-to-noise ratio high enough to make sure that you're not going to bring up too much noise by raising the level in post, you have to record at a slightly hotter level, a little bit of a higher level. With 24-bit, you've got much more dynamic range, so you can record at a slightly lower level without worrying about raising that more in post and bringing up a lot of noise with it. So that's just something to be aware of. That's going to be true with any 16-bit device, not just the SC1. All right, so overall, would I recommend the Fifine SC1 interface? Actually, yes, I would. If I sound surprised, it's because I really didn't expect much here. A plastic interface for about 50 bucks is not exactly something I expect to get fantastic results from. But once I started comparing it to the M-Track Solo, which has been a solid choice at this price point for quite a while, I actually noticed it's got several advantages like the lower noise preamps. But I still have to say my recommendation of the SC1 is based on a budget of $50 to $60. If you can't go higher than that for the interface, then the SC1 is a fine choice. However, if your budget is flexible up to $100 just for the interface, then I personally would suggest looking at options like the Vocaster 1 or even the Scarlett Solo 3rd Gen or the Rode AI1, depending on what you need it for. All of those are going to get you 24-bit conversion instead of 16-bit. Now, if you're mainly podcasting or using it for content creation where dialogue is the only thing you'll be recording, the Vocaster is a great choice for $99 because it's got enough gain to power any microphone. The preamp is nice and low noise. It's got extra connections here that are beneficial for content creators. It's just a great option for 99 bucks. But if you'll mainly be using condenser microphones or if you need an interface for music production, not just recording dialogue, then I actually wouldn't recommend the Vocaster, either the 1 or the 2. So if you do need to do some music production in addition to recording dialogue, then I would actually look at maybe the Focusrite Scarlett series if you're looking above this price point, but you need those instrument inputs. All of that said, if you're good with the 1 XLR input and you really want to keep the whole package of microphone and interface under 100 bucks, it's a pretty good choice here. The SC1 performed better than I expected. If you are interested in buying the SC1 or either the microphones that I used in this video, there are affiliate links to Amazon in the description if you'd like to support this channel. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.